Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and in this video, we've actually got a couple of things to address before I'll be happily eating some humble pie for myself on some of my worst predictions for the 2022 fantasy football season. But I did want to address, it's officially been over 2 weeks since I last posted a video here on YouTube, and for what I feel is a fairly good reason. After the whole Damar Hamlin situation on Week 17's edition of Monday Night Football, talking about fantasy football for the first time really just didn't feel fun to me. So I kind of wanted to take a step back here, do a lot of internal work behind the scenes on Sizzle Fantasy Sports here, and then come back to you guys when I was in a place where I felt like actually talking about fantasy and outlooks was something meaningful and that I could do without just being a robot here and bringing no energy and enthusiasm. Because on a personal level, just again, it didn't seem fun whatsoever to talk fantasy after that whole situation unfolded. And there was so much drama in fantasy leagues with how things were going to play out, and that just really wasn't, what I wanted to focus on at that point in time. Obviously, the health and well-being of Damar Hamlin and his safety, of course, and just seeing where, the football and NFL world was going to head from that point forward. I didn't want to be part of the speculation process, thinking and putting out there like my predictions and opinions and whatnot. That just didn't seem like something I was too interested in. So we're back to business here, talking through some stuff today. We've had a lot of really exciting work behind the scenes on our website, SIZZLEfantasy.com. If you guys haven't checked that out yet, make sure you do so. We've got a ton of stuff coming on that site in the form of content for you guys this offseason, so make sure that you haven't checked out the website, you do so, because again, lots of awesome stuff headed your way, both here on the YouTube channel and on SIZZLEfantasy.com, which can be found in the link in the description of today's episode. So without further ado, we have got some humble pie to eat today, as I referenced earlier. This is a really long-winded introduction. I apologize, but we're talking through 10 of my worst predictions from the preseason of this NFL year, and one just atrocity that happened during the NFL season for a start-sit prediction at the end of today's episode. So stay tuned for all that stuff, and I'll see you guys in the video. Alrighty, here we go, guys. So as you can probably see, we've changed up some things graphically. We've added in a little bit of animation on the screen, pumped myself up, made me just slightly bigger in the bottom portion of your screens here. We've actually, edited our logo, if you guys noticed that as well, to a more simplistic look now. So hopefully everything functions properly. I did actually notice sitting down today that there is one thing in the display that I still have to fix for you guys. The QR code, if you scan that at the top of the screen, is probably going to send you to a page that no longer exists, because as I talked about, we did a ton of stuff behind the scenes on SIZZLEfantasy.com to change things up there. So I'll have that fixed for the next video for you guys, so that actually sends you to a relevant page now. But we're talking today's episode now. I've done enough yapping about stuff non-related to this episode, so I just wanted to fill you guys in on what's going on here at SFS. My first horrid prediction of the 2022 fantasy football season was that I had DeAndre Swift essentially as a lock to finish as a top 5 fantasy football running back for this season. And lo and behold, he finished as the running back 21, which doesn't sound all that terrible when you say it out loud, but it actually was quite miserable, and a lot of that production was erratically unpredictable, and there was a lot of volatility in this fantasy football outlook that was just uncontrollable. So this is a guy that I thought, between his pass-catching upside, his talent as a playmaker, the ascension that I projected and was, honestly correct about for Detroit's offense this season, that didn't trickle down to DeAndre Swift. Rather, it went Jamal Williams' way, setting the Lions franchise record in single-season total touchdowns and having himself one hell of a year. So for DeAndre Swift, this was a miss for me. It was derailed partially by injuries, partially from usage, Dan Campbell, and that whole situation. Lots of moving pieces ultimately withheld Swift from reaching his maximum potential this year. Next up here, Allen Robinson. This is a guy who I had as a lock to be a top 24 wide receiver. He made the Sizzle Fantasy Sports must-own players list in our draft guide this past season and was one of my favorites for this upcoming year. This has been a guy who basically his whole career has been undervalued in fantasy football, and he's now had 2 consecutive seasons where he didn't live up to expectations. Fantasy managers were let down, and you looked at yourself at the end of the day and were very frustrated with the draft day decision that you made, and that was something that I had to live with in a majority of, not majority, I didn't have him in over 50% of my leagues, but we'll actually get into some ownership numbers in our best predictions of the season in a future episode this week. But whatever it was for my rostership for Allen Robinson, it wasn't great in the leagues where I drafted him. So all in all, a guy who I expected to be a volume monster, to get a lot of the, kind of spread out targets from Cooper Kupp, expecting that obviously his target share wouldn't decrease dramatically, but that you would see some diffusion of those looks to other players in this offense, again, primarily Allen Robinson. That didn't happen. Matt Stafford continued to just force feed Cooper Kupp while both of them were still healthy this season. And then the other part of things here is that in terms of a vertical pressing receiver, Allen Robinson didn't even get remotely close to getting the job done in that area for this team. He, frankly looked zapped. His speed was not good enough to get vertical on defenses, and he wasn't someone that I looked at as a high-value target downfield. Really, all he became limited to this season was running goal line fade routes and just mossing people for touchdowns using what athleticism he still had left. So if you're not getting the volume underneath, the offensive line was so poor. There were so many factors that just combusted A-Rob's 2022 fantasy football outlook, and that is something, the lessons learned from this, that we're going to carry in big time when looking at 2023 fantasy football, which, again, we have spent a lot of time already doing so, and have got a lot of exciting things in the works, like our rookie report for the 2023 season, which we have currently in the works. You can get access to it now on SIZZLEfantasy.com, but that's something that is continually being developed as the offseason progresses here. Next up, A.J. Brown. Now, you might be saying A.J. Brown was absolutely fantastic this season, Gavin. What could you have possibly gotten wrong? Well, I had A.J. Brown as a bust candidate for this season and a potential player to be weary of in terms of the risk that he presented to fantasy lineups. Now, my main reasoning for this is that I did not see enough from Jalen Hurts as a passer in year 2 of his NFL career to believe that he would be the level of passing threat needed to elevate A.J. Brown from his days in Tennessee. I kind of expected a lateral move here, and thus a guy coming off of an injury-riddled season and a player who overall had needed peak levels of efficiency to produce. I'm the biggest A.J. Brown fan. I have loved this guy since he came out in 2019 as a second-round pick to Tennessee, but I just saw red flag after red flag after red flag. And then Jalen Hurts and the leap as a passer happened, and that wasn't something that I had projected or forecasted this season, and thus here we are, me admitting my mistake, and extremely happy as ever because I was all over Jalen Hurts as a fantasy player. I just didn't think he'd be able to share that love, not only with A.J. Brown on a consistent level, but especially Devontae Smith as well. Darnell Mooney. Now, this is, you're going to see this trend pop up for a couple of receivers. We're going to be really, really careful of this heading into 2023, as it was a lesson that we learned at multiple junctures here. But essentially, the moral of the story with guys like Darnell Mooney and the next name on the list is that all fantasy wide receiver ones and guys who have high levels of target share in their respective offense are not created equal. And what I mean by that is that certain offenses aren't built to produce or sustain a relevant high-end wide receiver producer in fantasy football. Now, maybe our expectations for a Darnell Mooney or, the next guy on this list was a top 24 receiver, just simply a PPR wide receiver 2. These guys weren't even able to sustain that level of success simply because their offense was so geared towards the run game. Now, Chicago's offense specifically, has an offense that numerous times this year, as a matter of fact, I don't remember a time this season when this team got into a negative game script, which we projected as a bad team would happen and be the case. We project, obviously, in situations where you're falling behind late in contests, increased level of passing attempts and volume for that football team. That wasn't the case. They continued to pound the rock, do what their offensive identity was. Credit to them and props to the coaching staffs for doing so, but really threw us into a fantasy fit here. Obviously, Justin Fields has miles to develop as a passer still, and maybe he can make that Jalen Hurts level jump this coming year. But that was, a combination of factors that really derailed. Obviously, injuries as well for Darnell Mooney and Allen Robinson. We didn't even bring up his injury as well. But we're looking situationally where we were wrong prior to the injury ever playing a factor in the situation, because I would say it's fair and safe to say Darnell Mooney and Allen Robinson had lost startability long before their injuries unfolded. And that was the case with Drake London until late in the season, where maybe the last quarter of the year, if we're being generous, he emerged as a flex level player in PPR lineups. But the case was still very evident here. Drake London, an absurdly talented player, and this is kind of a cautionary tale of always drafting the most talented player available doesn't perfectly match up and work out. The Falcons were another run-centric and run-oriented football team. This was a unit that, with Marcus Mariota at the helm in the quarterback position, just wasn't, capable of producing fantasy-relevant receivers. And we saw that happen, disastrously with Kyle Pitts, who, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about in just a second here. So, again, the lesson learned is that not all number one receivers, not all guys who have phenomenal target shares. Drake London had one of the best target shares from a team-based perspective, as that stat is, in the National Football League. So this is a very, specific thing that we're going to be on the look for in 2023, but something that we definitely learned our lesson from here this season. Now, to Kyle Pitts, the same thing. We looked at Marcus Mariota in his Tennessee days. We looked at the success he produced for Delanie Walker season after season after season as a far less talented player. And the conclusion to draw from that was simple. Kyle Pitts is a better player. He's younger. He is closer to his prime. This guy is going to explode and annihilate defenses this season. And it never materialized. Again, another player that had an injury. We're not even talking about that, though. That really doesn't factor into the reason that we were wrong this season, because Kyle Pitts was not being productive to an extent that made you feel comfortable with the draft capital investment you made up until the point in which he was injured. We know he has the talent. We know that he has the playmaking capabilities. The balls just weren't there. The passes were erratic. They were inconsistent. The catchability of said passes was atrocious. It was a dumpster fire. I would have loved to see Kyle Pitts with a Desmond Ridder at the end of the season, a more natural passer, but that wasn't really the situation that we got to see unfold. And as a result, we saw, struggling for an extended period of time that stems back even to last season where he had just one touchdown. Travis Etienne was another player that I had on our SFS must-own list in the draft guide this year, a player that we were all over. The playmaking capability, the talent, the traits, the skill set, whatever you want to call it, it was all there. It was great. It was fantastic. It was the dream outlook for a PPR fantasy football running back at third-round draft capital ADP. It looked like a match made in heaven. Doug Peterson running backs were averaging over 4 opportunities per game in the passing game. And Travis Etienne, who may, be amongst the top 2 or 3 most talented guys that Peterson has ever had in that role, failed to meet the mark and to fall within or above the average that I just stated there. So Etienne had himself a pretty underwhelming season on a variety of levels. This is a guy who was not nearly as productive on the goal line as I expected this season. He actually had a lot of struggles getting stuffed, denied end zone opportunities. And obviously you had the struggles early in the year with J-Rob before he got shipped out of there. But there was multiple factors that played a role in Etienne not necessarily living up to his expectations as a league winner. He did have a couple of nice games during the fantasy postseason and as that Jags team caught fire, but it wasn't as smooth of sailing as I expected it to be for a large portion of this year. And even so, in game scripts that I expected to be negative, where a pass catching back would still have relevance, there wasn't quite as many check down passes as I had penciled in for this Jags offense either. So, again, multifaceted views on why and how we were wrong this season. Tom Brady, another quarterback, or really another player. This is our first quarterback we're talking through in today's episode, but this is one where I had a really good level of relaxation, settling back into the sweet spot of round 6 to 8 quarterbacks. And really the only guys that worked out in that realm of draft position were, your early 6th round picks, and his ADP pushed up even higher into the end of the summer, and that being Jalen Hurts. Obviously Kyler Murray got hurt at the end of the season, and you're talking about guys like Matthew Stafford in that range that upset us. Obviously Aaron Rodgers was terrible, just a little bit outside that group. Russell Wilson, a player I loved in that range. Derek Carr. All of these guys stunk, and Tom Brady was one that I was incredibly bullish on. You looked at the passing attempt volume from him last season, number 1 in every category. The opportunities, red zone passing, simple passing attempts. I think he set an NFL record for total completions. He was all over the map. That was this season, and he still stunk in fantasy football. Coming off of a QB3 finish in 2021, the overall offensive production just regressed big time for Tampa Bay. Part of it's offensive line, part of it's Tom Brady simply not standing in the pocket and taking hits anymore the way he used to. top to bottom, it was a atrocious offense to watch, and Tom fell very, very short of our expectations. Mike Evans had 6 total touchdowns after week 17, which obviously is the cutoff for most of our fantasy football leagues. He had 3 touchdowns entering into that point in time. So through 16 weeks of the season, Mike Evans had produced 3 total touchdowns. That's terrible. You've got a guy, obviously, in Chris Godwin, who had to come back from his ACL injury. It wasn't the smoothest sailing early. He got back a little bit, and the targets were up there. But all in all, I would say this Bucs offense was pretty disappointing. He was the QB 11 in 2022, so barely finishing on the cusp of that QB 1 finish there. Michael Pittman, we drank the Kool-Aid here. This is a guy that we expected to have a lot of target volume in his offense, to be a really, really nice player in terms of his draft capital in the early to mid-third round of leagues this past season. And, you know, this was largely predicated on our expected stability being inserted from a guy in Matt Ryan instead of and opposed to a Carson Wentz, who a lot of us had a very negative light of, but actually produces relatively decent fantasy success depending on the receiver that he locks onto. For Matt Ryan, that one stat was deep ball accuracy, and something that we were really excited to see from Michael Pittman. He was actually ranked number 2 in that category last year, or in 2021, Matt Ryan was. And it was evident as ever from week 1, statue, immobile, no agility or pocket presence at this stage of his career, and that resulted in Matt Ryan being benched several times. Now, I still think he was the best option for Michael Pittman, for an Alec Pierce, a Paris Campbell, for JT as a rusher, just stable offensive presence for that team, or at least as stable as they had access to, but it was still bad, and it was still something that you didn't want to see, experience, or have to deal with if you were a Colts fan or fantasy manager of anyone on Indianapolis. Pittman was the wide receiver 23 to finish this year, so far below his ADP, 10.1 points per game, barely double digits, which is pretty underwhelming. Only 3 touchdowns all season. For a guy with that type of wingspan and catch radius, you would expect a bit better there. And again, quarterback turmoil, just 2 100-yard games for him the entirety of the season. Russell Wilson next up here, talking about that realm of quarterbacks we absolutely loved drafting this season. He just didn't live up to expectations. Letting Russ cook was like, you know, just turning your gas oven or stove top, whatever it's called, on, and simply walking away from the kitchen and just, you know, experimenting with what would happen. And, you know, shit hit the fan, and it was pretty bad. This stemmed into other predictions, guys, we were incredibly bullish on, like Jerry Jeudy this season, not living up to our expectations. We had him ranked just outside of the top 12 fantasy receivers. I want to say he was our wide receiver 14 or 15 heading into this season. Jerry finished as the wide receiver 26, so not great. He did have 6 touchdowns, but the offense never clicked. This was a team that was just out of sync. Their play design and scheme just seemed flawed every single week, and Russ's turnovers, it was so bad. And at the end of the day, we might be seeing kind of the downward slope of Russell Wilson. I'm extremely fascinated to see what he comes back and does in 2023, but I think it's safe to say for all of us, our expectations for Russell Wilson have significantly decreased after seeing what this year had in store for that Broncos offense. So that'll actually do it for today's episode. That was our 10th and final player, 10 of our worst predictions from this season. That one honorable mention I almost forgot here that we did have was in the early stages of this season. We had a game with Pittsburgh against Buffalo. On my must-sit list, I had Gabriel Davis. In this game, Gabriel Davis, in which I had him as a sit candidate, went full Randy Moss on the National Football League. Had 3 receptions for 171 yards. 2 touchdowns, it should have been 3, after narrowly missing on another one. 30.5 fantasy points. Absolutely brutal, Gabe Davis. You didn't have to do me like that. Absolutely unpredictable all year. Our analysis for that was simple. It was a game. It was one of the largest point spreads I've ever seen in the NFL for Buffalo taking on Pittsburgh in terms of Pittsburgh being an underdog. My explanation was, hey, you know, if Buffalo just crushes these guys like we expect them to, and there isn't really much hope late in the game for, you know, obviously passing opportunities for Gabe Davis, he's simply not going to produce. And lo and behold, he was every bit as involved in that absolute crushing blowout as anyone else was on that Bills team, including Josh Allen. So brutal, brutal, brutal stuff. I apologize for where we were wrong this season, you guys. As always, I appreciate the heck out of all of you for watching today's episode. Remember, check out sizzlefantasy.com. Lots of fun and exciting stuff going on there. There's a ton of areas where you can, sign up for our email list and get updated anytime anything interesting comes out. I'll be tossing discounts at your guys' way for any of our products this offseason. Again, tons of Dynasty stuff, tons of rookie evaluations. I'm actually in the process right now of writing a 65 plus page book, which is going to essentially give you every single bit of information you need about any of these prospects and evaluating rookies at any position for any year in fantasy football. So you're not going to want to miss that stuff. As always, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. I appreciate you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next episode. Peace out.